Consider the span of human existence, not the 5,000 years we call recorded history, but the full arc of our species. Anatomically modern humans emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. We developed language, art, complex social structures, and sophisticated tool use tens of thousands of years before any civilization left written records. For 295,000 of those 300,000 years, humans lived, loved, innovated, and died without leaving documents we can read. They built no libraries, carved no chronicles, maintained no archives. What we know of them comes from fragments, stone tools scattered in ancient soil, pigments on cave walls, bones buried in careful arrangements, traces of campfires long extinguished. This vast expanse is what archaeologists call prehistory. Not because nothing happened, but because it happened before writing emerged to record it. The absence of written records doesn't mean absence of achievement, wisdom, or complexity. It means we must reconstruct human experience from material traces alone, interpreting artifacts without the guidance of their creators' own words. What puzzles scholars is the timeline's curious compression. For hundreds of thousands of years, human material culture remained relatively stable. Evidence of intelligence and adaptation, certainly, but not the explosive transformation we associate with civilization. Then, beginning roughly 12,000 years ago, something shifted. Permanent settlements emerged. Agriculture developed independently across multiple continents. Monumental architecture appeared, population centers grew, and eventually, around 3200 BCE in Mesopotamia and 3000 BCE in Egypt, writing systems crystallized, and history, as we conventionally understand it, began. Why did this transformation occur when it did, and not 50,000 years earlier? What happened during those long millennia when humans were cognitively identical to us, but lived in ways dramatically different? And perhaps most intriguingly, what knowledge, what achievements, what understanding might have existed in those undocumented ages, only to vanish without trace because no one wrote it down? Tonight, we explore not conspiracy theories about lost super civilizations, but the genuine mystery of deep human time, the documented archaeological record, the honest gaps in our understanding, and what scholars continue to debate about humanity's long journey before written history began. The foundation, what we actually know. The archaeological evidence for human development is substantial, meticulously gathered over more than a century of excavation, analysis, and increasingly sophisticated dating techniques. This isn't speculation. It's the verifiable record of what survived in the ground. Anatomically modern Homo sapiens emerged in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago, based on fossil evidence including skulls discovered in Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, and Omo Kibish, Ethiopia. By 70,000 years ago, some populations had developed sophisticated symbolic behavior, personal ornaments, ochre pigments for body decoration, carefully shaped bone tools. The Blombos Cave in South Africa preserves shell beads and engraved ochre pieces from this period. Evidence of abstract thinking and symbolic communication. Between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, humans began migrating out of Africa in waves that would eventually populate every continent except Antarctica. They carried with them not just biological traits, but cultural knowledge, techniques for making fire, strategies for hunting, methods of tool manufacture, social structures that anthropologists can only infer from burial patterns and artifact distributions. By 40,000 years ago, cave paintings appeared in Europe. The Chauvet Cave in France contains remarkably sophisticated animal depictions dated to approximately 36,000 years ago, showing artistic skill that surprises viewers who assume primitive humans created crude images. Similar artistic traditions emerged in Indonesia, Australia, and eventually across inhabited continents, suggesting that symbolic expression through visual art was a fundamental human capacity carried worldwide. This much is solidly established, supported by radiocarbon dating, stratigraphy, comparative analysis across sites, and multiple independent lines of evidence. Mainstream archaeology doesn't dispute these patterns. What scholars do debate is interpretation. What these artifacts reveal about cognitive capacity, social organization, belief systems, and the scope of knowledge that left no permanent trace. Because here's what makes the archaeological record both invaluable and frustratingly limited. It preserves only what doesn't decay. Stone endures. Bone can last millennia under the right conditions. Pigments on cave walls survive in protected environments, but wood rots, plant fibers disintegrate, leather crumbles, oral traditions vanish with the last speaker. Anything crafted from organic materials, the vast majority of what hunter-gatherer peoples likely created, simply disappears from the physical record after a few centuries or millennia. This creates a profound preservation bias. We see stone tools in abundance because stone survives. We assume stone tools were central to prehistoric technology because that's what remains. But ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies reveal that their material culture includes elaborate basketry, sophisticated wooden implements, complex plant-based medicines, and extensive ecological knowledge, none of which would survive to enter the archaeological record if their societies ceased to exist tomorrow. The question scholars continue to examine is this: how much of prehistoric human achievement, knowledge, and complexity has vanished completely, not because it didn't exist, but because it was created from materials that couldn't withstand the passage of time? The deep exploration, the long silence before agriculture. For the majority of human existence, hundreds of thousands of years, people lived as mobile hunter-gatherers. They moved with seasonal resources, maintained relatively small group sizes, left light footprints on the landscape. The archaeological signature of such existence is sparse by nature. These weren't people who built permanent structures or accumulated possessions they couldn't carry. Their lifestyle was adapted to mobility, flexibility, ecological intimacy. Yet calling these populations primitive would be profoundly misleading. Cognitive archaeologists emphasize that the humans who created the cave paintings at Lascaux or Altamira possessed brains identical to ours in size and structure. They were capable of abstract reasoning, complex language, long-term planning, artistic expression, and sophisticated social cooperation. They navigated vast territories, tracked seasonal animal migrations, identified hundreds of plant species by their properties, and transmitted this accumulated knowledge across generations through oral tradition and practical apprenticeship. What they apparently didn't do, or at least what we have no evidence they did, was develop agriculture, build cities, or invent writing systems. For the vast majority of human existence, these innovations didn't emerge despite cognitive capacity that should have made them possible. The shift, when it came, appears concentrated in a remarkably narrow window of time. Between approximately 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, multiple human populations independently began experimenting with plant cultivation and animal domestication. In the Fertile Crescent of the Near East, people started cultivating wheat and barley while domesticating sheep and goats. In China, rice and millet cultivation emerged. In Mesoamerica, maize, beans, and squash. In Africa, sorghum and yams. In New Guinea, taro and bananas. This parallel development across widely separated regions, all occurring within a few thousand years after hundreds of thousands of years without such innovations, is what archaeologists call the Neolithic Revolution. It represents, arguably, the most profound transformation in human history. The shift from subsistence strategies based on wild resources to deliberate manipulation of plant and animal genetics through selective breeding. Mainstream archaeology attributes this timing largely to climate. The last glacial maximum, the peak of the most recent ice age, ended around 19,000 years ago. By 12,000 years ago, the planet had warmed considerably, stabilizing into the Holocene epoch we still inhabit. This climatic stability created conditions favorable for agriculture, predictable seasonal patterns, expanded ranges for certain wild grain species, concentration of both human and animal populations in resource-rich areas. Some scholars propose that population pressure in these favorable zones pushed groups toward intensifying food production. Others suggest that sedentary lifestyles came first, settlements near rich fishing grounds or wild grain fields, and agriculture emerged afterward to support those established communities. Still others point to cultural and social factors. The desire for reliable surplus to support feasting, status competition, or emerging religious practices requiring permanent ritual sites. What becomes intriguing when examining this transition is what archaeologists call the broad-spectrum revolution that preceded full agriculture, evidence that before people committed to farming, they began exploiting wider ranges of resources, including small game, shellfish, and plants previously ignored. This suggests experimentation, innovation, a willingness to try new subsistence strategies. But here's what makes historians pause. If humans possessed the cognitive capacity and the environmental opportunity, why did agriculture not emerge earlier in previous interglacial warm periods? The Eemian interglacial, from approximately 130,000 to 115,000 years ago, provided similarly favorable conditions. Yet no evidence suggests humans developed agriculture during that time. One interpretation holds that cognitive or cultural prerequisites hadn't yet developed, perhaps the social structures necessary to coordinate agricultural labor, or the conceptual frameworks needed to imagine multi-generational plant breeding projects. Another suggests that population densities hadn't reached thresholds requiring intensified food production. A third notes that oral transmission of complex technical knowledge requires stable, connected populations. Perhaps earlier groups were too scattered, too mobile, too vulnerable to local extinctions. The debate isn't whether agriculture happened around 12,000 years ago. That's well documented. The question is why then and not earlier, despite apparent capacity. And that question opens a deeper one. What other innovations, what other knowledge systems might humans have developed during the long prehistoric period, only to have them disappear without trace when populations declined, migrated, or faced environmental catastrophes? Could there have been sophisticated astronomical knowledge never written down, transmitted orally, and then lost? Detailed medicinal understanding of plant properties, refined over millennia, vanishing when particular lineages died out. Elaborate philosophical or spiritual systems, as complex as any later tradition, surviving only in fragmentary form in the mythologies of later peoples. We cannot know with certainty what was lost because, by definition, it left no recoverable evidence. But the archaeological record does offer tantalizing hints of unexpected complexity in unexpected times. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, dated to approximately 9600 BCE, predates the clear emergence of agriculture in that region. Yet it consists of massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons, arranged in circular structures and decorated with elaborate animal carvings. The site required organized labor, sophisticated planning, and apparently served as a ritual or gathering center for hunter-gatherer populations across a wide area. Its existence challenges conventional narratives that placed monument building strictly after agriculture, created surplus and social hierarchy. Instead, Göbekli Tepe suggests that complex social organization and monumental construction could emerge from hunter-gatherer societies, given sufficient resource abundance and cultural motivation. The implications ripple through our understanding of prehistoric social complexity. Perhaps we've underestimated the organizational capacity of pre-agricultural societies. Similarly, sites across Europe preserve evidence of sophisticated astronomical knowledge embedded in megalithic monuments. Stonehenge's alignment with solstice sunrise is well known, but less famous Neolithic sites show equally precise celestial orientations. Newgrange in Ireland, built around 3200 BCE, features a passage that channels sunlight directly into the central chamber only during the winter solstice sunrise, a feat requiring generations of astronomical observation and geometric precision. These monuments demonstrate that prehistoric peoples engaged in systematic long-term observation of celestial patterns, accumulated knowledge over generations, and applied that understanding in creating structures that encoded astronomical information. This represents scientific inquiry in a very real sense. Systematic observation, knowledge accumulation, practical application, occurring thousands of years before writing, would allow such knowledge to be recorded explicitly. What we don't know is how widespread such knowledge traditions were, or what else might have been understood and transmitted orally that didn't happen to be encoded in durable stone structures. The Antikythera mechanism offers a sobering parallel from the historical period. This ancient Greek device, recovered from a shipwreck and dated to approximately 100 BCE, contains a complex system of bronze gears that calculated astronomical positions and predicted eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Nothing comparable appears in the archaeological record again until medieval Islamic and European clockmakers developed similar mechanisms more than 1,000 years later. For decades after its discovery in 1901, the mechanism was dismissed or misunderstood by scholars who couldn't imagine such sophisticated technology existing in antiquity. Only through modern imaging techniques and detailed analysis did researchers eventually reconstruct its function and appreciate its complexity. The mechanism now stands as a reminder that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Sophisticated knowledge and technology can exist, be lost, and leave almost no trace, especially when created from materials that corrode or when knowledge is concentrated among small groups of specialists. If such loss can occur within the historical period, when writing preserved at least some knowledge, how much more likely is complete loss during the long prehistoric era when nothing was written down at all? Multiple mythological traditions across cultures preserve stories that some scholars interpret as possible echoes of very ancient knowledge. Flood myths appear in Mesopotamian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, Native American, and Australian Aboriginal traditions. Could some reflect genuine cultural memory of post-glacial sea level rise that inundated coastal settlements between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago? Geological evidence confirms that sea levels rose approximately 120 meters during this period, drowning vast coastal plains where many prehistoric peoples likely lived. If oral traditions could preserve memories of landscape-transforming floods across 10 millennia, what other knowledge might they have carried, later misunderstood or dismissed as mere mythology rather than encoded memory? Scholars remain divided. Some emphasize the unreliability of oral transmission over extreme time periods. Stories change, merge, acquire new meanings, become detached from original reference. Others point to studies showing that certain Aboriginal Australian traditions appear to encode accurate information about landscapes that existed more than 7,000 years ago, suggesting oral traditions can maintain surprising accuracy under specific cultural conditions that prioritize precise intergenerational transmission. The honest answer is that we don't know how much genuine historical or technical information might be encoded in mythological traditions, nor do we have reliable methods to extract such information while distinguishing it from later embellishments and symbolic elaborations. What we can say with confidence is that the long prehistoric period wasn't simply a static precursor to real human achievement. It was a vast expanse of time during which fully modern humans lived, thought, loved, learned, and created. Some of that experience left traces we can still interpret. Much of it left nothing that could survive, and some proportion, we cannot know how much, might have included knowledge, achievements, and understanding that would surprise us if we could somehow recover it. The control of narrative, how we construct prehistory. The story of human prehistory isn't discovered whole in the ground. It's constructed through interpretation of fragmentary evidence, shaped by the assumptions, priorities, and intellectual frameworks of those doing the interpreting. This doesn't mean the story is arbitrary or that all interpretations are equally valid. It means that how we understand the prehistoric past reflects not only what survived and what we found, but also what we've been looking for and how we've chosen to interpret it. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, European archaeologists operated within evolutionary frameworks that assumed linear progression from primitive to civilized, with European society representing the pinnacle. Prehistoric peoples were characterized as crude, intellectually limited, living in a state of bare survival. This perspective reflected contemporary imperial ideologies that justified colonialism through claims of cultural and intellectual superiority. Archaeological interpretation from that era emphasized technology, particularly metalworking and monumental architecture, as markers of advancement, while dismissing or ignoring evidence of artistic sophistication, ecological knowledge, or complex social organization among prehistoric and non-Western peoples. Cave paintings were initially attributed to more recent periods because scholars couldn't imagine primitive Ice Age humans creating such accomplished art. When incontrovertible dating proved the paintings ancient, the discovery required fundamental revision of assumptions about prehistoric cognitive capacity. Modern archaeology has undergone substantial self-examination, acknowledging these biases and developing more nuanced interpretive frameworks. Contemporary scholars emphasize that hunter-gatherer societies weren't failed attempts at civilization, but successful adaptations to diverse environments, often demonstrating sophisticated ecological knowledge, social complexity, and cultural richness. Yet interpretation still inevitably involves choices. Which sites receive excavation funding? What questions do researchers ask? Which artifacts are deemed significant enough for detailed analysis and publication? These decisions collectively shape what aspects of prehistory become known while others remain unexplored or unpublicized. The archaeological record itself is skewed by preservation conditions. We know far more about prehistoric peoples who lived in caves because caves preserve organic materials better than about those who lived in open-air camps or tropical forests where nearly everything decays. We know more about coastal populations that left shell middens marking centuries of occupation than about inland groups whose camps leave barely detectable traces. This creates an inevitable distortion. Our understanding of typical prehistoric life is biased toward environments and activities that happen to preserve well, not necessarily toward what was actually most common or most important in prehistoric human experience. Additionally, the concentration of archaeological research in Europe, North America, and parts of the Near East, regions with long academic traditions and substantial research funding, means we know far more about prehistory in these areas than in regions that likely supported equally complex societies but have received less systematic investigation. Recent discoveries continually remind us of this limitation. Amazon basin research now reveals extensive pre-Columbian landscape modification and large settlements previously unknown, challenging assumptions that the region supported only small, scattered populations before European contact. The pattern is clear. What we know about the prehistoric past is determined partly by what existed, partly by what survived, and partly by where and how we've chosen to look. Honest scholarship requires acknowledging these limitations rather than presenting incomplete knowledge as complete understanding. Modern archaeology increasingly incorporates perspectives from descendant communities, indigenous peoples whose oral traditions and cultural practices may preserve insights about local prehistory that complement or challenge interpretations based solely on material evidence. This collaboration has sometimes revealed information that earlier purely Western archaeological frameworks, missed or misinterpreted. The inclusion of diverse perspectives doesn't undermine archaeological science. It strengthens it by reducing interpretive blind spots and acknowledging that material evidence is always interpreted through cultural lenses. No observer is neutral. Awareness of one's own biases is the beginning of more rigorous interpretation, not a weakness. What emerges from this examination isn't that we know nothing reliable about the prehistoric past, but rather that our knowledge is provisional, incomplete, and subject to revision as new evidence emerges or as we develop better interpretive frameworks. That provisional quality is a strength of honest scholarship, not a failure. It's what allows knowledge to grow and correct itself over time. Philosophical reflection, the weight of unmeasured time. There's something profoundly humbling about contemplating deep human time. The recognition that people lived, thought, and experienced existence for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone conceived of writing down their thoughts for future generations to read. Every person who lived in those vast ages experienced their life as fully as we experience ours. They felt joy and grief, curiosity and fear, connection and isolation. They watched their children grow, mourned their elders, wondered about the stars. They solved problems, created beauty, transmitted their accumulated wisdom as best they could to those who came after. They were not incomplete versions of us, waiting for history to begin. They were fully human, navigating their world with intelligence and intention. Yet nearly all of them are utterly anonymous to us. We cannot know their names, hear their voices, understand their individual personalities or particular insights. What remains are the collective traces of their material existence. Stone tools scattered across continents, paintings on cave walls, the genetic signatures preserved in our own DNA, showing patterns of ancient migration and interbreeding. This reality forces us to confront the limits of human memory itself. Civilization, writing, historical records. These preserve individual names and particular events for a few thousand years at most. Beyond that horizon lies a kind of collective forgetting, a slow erasure where individual lives dissolve into archaeological patterns and statistical populations. What does it mean that so much human experience simply vanishes? Not just the experience of prehistoric individuals, but potentially entire knowledge traditions, philosophical insights, artistic achievements, scientific understandings that emerged, flourished briefly, and then disappeared without leaving interpretable traces. The question isn't whether a lost super-civilization built pyramids with advanced technology. The archaeological evidence doesn't support such claims, and invoking them distracts from more profound considerations. The real question is more subtle and perhaps more troubling. How much genuine human knowledge, wisdom, and achievement has been lost simply through the ordinary processes of time, cultural disruption, and the limits of what materials can preserve. Imagine a particularly insightful person living 30,000 years ago, someone who understood their environment with unusual depth, who made intuitive leaps about natural patterns, who developed effective techniques and shared them with their community. Their contributions might have benefited people for generations, might have been remembered in oral traditions for centuries. But eventually, those memories would fade, The techniques would be forgotten or attributed to others. The insights would be lost or rediscovered independently by someone else millennia later. We lose nothing less than an entire dimension of human experience, the intellectual and creative life of hundreds of thousands of years of fully conscious, fully intelligent human beings who had no way to speak across vast time to us. This isn't a loss we can recover, because there's nothing left to find. It's an irrecoverable absence, a silence in the human story that will never be filled. And perhaps coming to terms with that absence is part of what it means to think honestly about human existence. Accepting that consciousness, creativity, wisdom, and love have been experienced by billions of people whose particular expressions of those universal qualities are gone forever, surviving only in the general fact that humans have always been human, always been capable of profound thought and feeling. The emergence of writing, then, represents not the beginning of human capability, but merely the beginning of our ability to preserve individual thought across millennia. It's a technology of memory, allowing us to hear specific voices from the past rather than merely inferring that voices existed. But writing also distorts. Once history begins, we focus our attention on the documented, sometimes forgetting that documented experience is a tiny fraction of human existence. We construct narratives of progress, from darkness to enlightenment, from simplicity to complexity, that flatten the reality of constant change, innovation, loss, and reinvention that characterized every era of human life. Perhaps what the long prehistoric silence teaches us is humility. Humility about our own historical moment, which may seem consequential now, but will eventually fade into generalized pattern if our species endures long enough. Humility about our knowledge, which is always incomplete and subject to revision. Humility about consciousness itself, recognizing that every era of human existence contained unique perspectives, insights, and experiences that are valuable simply because they were genuinely human, even if we can no longer access them. The mystery of prehistory isn't a puzzle to be solved with a dramatic revelation. It's a permanent feature of human existence. The knowledge that we came from somewhere, that vast time preceded us, that countless people lived and thought and wondered before us, and that most of what they experienced is gone beyond recovery. Sometimes the most honest answer to a profound question is simply to acknowledge its depth, to sit with the uncertainty it creates, and to let that uncertainty inspire appreciation for the knowledge we do possess, while maintaining curiosity about what remains unknown. Closing. The questions that remain. We began by asking what happened during the vast expanse of human existence before written history emerged to document experience. We've explored the archaeological evidence, solid and substantial in its way, revealing populations who created art, developed technologies, adapted to diverse environments, and eventually transformed their relationship with the natural world through agriculture and sedentary living. We've examined the genuine gaps in our understanding, the knowledge systems that couldn't survive in materials that decay, the innovations that might have emerged and been lost in the long millennia before writing, the question of why certain developments occurred when they did, After so many thousands of years of apparent stability, what becomes clear is that the prehistoric past holds mysteries not because evidence has been deliberately hidden, but because preservation itself is selective, survival of remains is partial, and interpretation will always be incomplete. We're reconstructing an immense story from scattered fragments, and honest scholarship requires acknowledging the limits of what those fragments can tell us. Prehistory contains no secret cache of advanced technology waiting to be discovered, no suppressed evidence of ancient super-civilizations. But it does contain something more profound, the lived experience of hundreds of thousands of years of human existence that shaped who we are as a species. The cognitive capacities we possess, the social instincts we inherited, the fundamental patterns of human behavior, all were forged during that long period before history began. The people who lived in those ages weren't waiting for civilization to make them complete. They were already complete, already fully human, creating meaning and beauty and understanding within their particular circumstances. What we've lost isn't proof of something extraordinary beyond normal human experience. It's simply the particular details of ordinary human experience multiplied across vast time. Perhaps the most appropriate response to this loss isn't frustration at what we cannot know, but appreciation for the depth of human time itself, and recognition that every era of human life, including our own, eventually fades into the kind of generalized pattern that prehistory represents. We are making history now, but from the perspective of people 50,000 years hence, our particular names, thoughts, and creations will likely be as lost as those of the Paleolithic peoples we can no longer identify individually. That realization doesn't diminish the importance of living thoughtfully now. If anything, it emphasizes it. We create meaning not because it will endure forever, but because creating meaning is what humans do, what we've always done across hundreds of thousands of years of existence. The mystery of prehistory, then, isn't a puzzle with a hidden solution. It's an invitation to humility about the limits of knowledge, appreciation for the fragments we do possess, and recognition of continuity across vast time. The people who painted caves and carved ivory and shaped stone lived lives as rich in meaning as ours, loved and mourned and wondered with the same depth of feeling we know. That they are largely anonymous to us doesn't erase their existence. It simply reminds us that consciousness and creativity have always been part of human experience, whether documented or not. Perhaps that's where we should rest tonight, not with answers wrapped in false certainty, but with questions that open onto genuine wonder. The prehistoric past is gone beyond complete recovery, yet it lives on in the minds we inherited, the capacities we possess, the fundamental humanity we share with every person who has ever lived. And sometimes, acknowledging what we cannot know is the most honest tribute we can pay to the vast multitudes who came before us, who left no names, but who shaped, through their collective existence across deep time, everything about what it means to be